Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Michael Crawford. I'm the CEO of the Soil Cooperative Research Centre, the Soil CRC. My task today is just to introduce this session and then to hand over to our speakers. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, wherever we are in Australia, and I pay my respects to our elders past and present. At the Soil CRC, we continue to be inspired and motivated by their management of lands over many millennia. And in that same context, today's panel discussion continues that theme of rewarding soil stewardship. I'll introduce the speakers shortly, but firstly, a couple of words about the Soil CRC, recognising that in today's audience, we have many attendees who might be joining us for the first time in our regular session of webinars and panel discussions. The Soil Cooperative Research Centre was established in 2017 with funding from the Australian Government and its 40 participants for 10 years to undertake R&D to help give farmers the tools and knowledge they need to better manage their soils and to improve their productivity and profitability. We have 8 university partners, 4 state government agencies, 8 industry groups, and importantly, 20 grower groups from across Australia that helps to give us that end user perspective, ensure that our research is relevant and fit for purpose in helping farmers to improve their soil management. We're now into the 5th year of the CRC, and we have quite a number of projects underway, some of which you'll get an insight into today in today's panel discussion. Before going too much further, let me just advertise and highlight a couple of upcoming events. In 2 weeks' time, on the 9th of November, we have a webinar on one of our projects on addressing complex soil constraints to be delivered by Jason Condon, the project leader from Sturt University. And then towards the end of November, the 23rd of November, our project on soil carbon and regenerative agriculture, our project leader, Gren Grellet, who works for Monarchy Winnow Landcare Research New Zealand. We will talk about that project, albeit with a focus on the Australian activities and results. You can register and for both of them in much the same way as you did for this webinar via the Soil CRC website, and I think via the links that might be being shared in the chat function at the moment. I'd encourage you to take the opportunity to go to our website to find out more about the Soil CRC, to follow us on Twitter, to connect with us on LinkedIn, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can continue to receive information about the Soil CRC and its activities such as this in a format that's relevant to you. Today's panel discussion is being recorded and will be available on our website and via our YouTube channel for you to review in the future, or for you to share with others who might not be here today. The panel discussion will go for about half an hour, or a little bit more, and then we'll open it up more broadly to questions from the participants. So I encourage you to type your questions into the Q&A box, and our facilitator, Catherine Allan, will be able to read them and perhaps pass them on to the ask them of the panel. And if you see a question there that someone else has asked, you can upvote it and put it up towards the top of the list. You might also want to have a bit of a commentary going in the chat function on the side. Make your views known on certain things and share that your thoughts. But if you actually want a question asked of the panel, put it in the Q&A box. So let me go to our speakers. Firstly, our facilitator today will be Catherine Allan, who's an Associate Professor in Environmental Sociology and Planning at Sturt University. She's also the leader of Program 1, where much of this work is relevant. The program is called Investing in High Performance Soils, and it's about how we might motivate, reward, incentivise farmers for good soil management beyond increased productivity and profitability. Our panel members include Nick Pawsey, a Senior Lecturer in the School of Accounting and Finance at Sturt University and the leader of a Soil CRC project on the role that financial institutions might play in rewarding soil stewardship. Our second panel speaker is Professor Mark Morrison, who's Associate Dean of Research in the Faculty of Business, Justice and Behavioural Sciences at Sturt University also. And Mark also leads a project in the Soil CRC about activating markets and assessing consumer willingness to pay for soil stewardship by farmers. And thirdly, and very importantly, we have Craig Carter, who's a grazier, a farmer in the Liverpool Plains in northern New South Wales. He's one of the first case study subjects for Soils for Life, and Soils for Life, many of you will know of, and Soils for Life is a participant in the Soil CRC, along with Sturt University and all the others I referred to earlier. So it's good to have Craig giving a landholder perspective, a farmer perspective on some of these issues. So without further ado, I'm going to pass across to Catherine Allan to introduce the topic in more detail and to facilitate the discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Probably the best thing for me to do is, firstly, thank you all for coming today, and to just set stewardship in, particularly soil stewardship, into some context. So stewardship is looking after something for someone else. In program 1 of the Soil CRC, we use the term soil stewardship to encompass the caring for soil that goes beyond the management of soil for short-term profit or production. So the concept of soil stewardship moves soil management out of the purely private sphere because a range of ecological and human processes now and in the future rely on soil functioning well. So we need soil managers, and a lot of them are farmers. We need those managers to be soil stewards for us and for the future. However, people and governments who rely on functional soils, healthy soils, often don't know that they do. And even if they do, there are few mechanisms to link them to soil managers. Importantly, there are few mechanisms to reward soil stewardship. So that's what this panel is about. We're going to explore ways to reward soil stewardship undertaken by Australian farmers. Now, our panel members are extremely well placed to discuss this topic. So, gentlemen, I'll hand over to each of you to introduce yourselves and explain how you obtained your expertise in this area. Craig, I'd like to start with you if I can.
Hi everybody, Craig Carter. I've been involved in what's now become known as regenerative agriculture, specifically grazing, for the best part of 20 years. I think it's next week. Part of my focus has been very much on soils, which is why we're here, but on a very holistic model, so that we're looking at soils, ecology, mineral cycle, water cycle, etc., and how we can make it all function. And then, as is the topic for today, how we can be rewarded for doing so. I'm also a member of Land to Market, which has a ecological outcome verification model, which focuses on all those aspects. And that's where I'll probably point the conversation today a little.
Thanks, Craig. We'll come back to much of that, but I'd like to Nick to introduce himself a little bit more and where you've come from, Nick.
Thanks, Catherine. Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your participation today. I'm Nick Pawsey, based at CSU, Albury, with an environmental accounting and finance background. And over the past few years, I've been involved in a few soil CRC projects that have focused on the role of financial institutions in rewarding soil stewardship. And through our prior work, we've engaged with various banks, corporate advisors, land valuers and others to understand their interest in soil stewardship and their thoughts on what is holding back the recognition of soil stewardship in banking and investment decisions. And this is all informed the priorities of a project that will start in November, which will involve a number of pilot activities that are focused on activating financial markets to reward soil stewardship.
Great, and we'll ask you to tell us more about that in a little while. But I'd like to also introduce Mark, or ask Mark to introduce himself.
Thanks, Catherine. Mark Morrison. I've been working in environmental, agricultural, economics and marketing for about 30 years. I taught market research and market analysis for many years. So done a lot of work in markets and teaching in markets, and in recent years a fair bit of entrepreneurship as well. Over the last sort of 10 years before getting involved with soil CRC, I did a couple of projects on soil carbon and composting, actually. But since I've been involved in the soil CRC, and my knowledge of soil and activating markets has really increased, I've been involved in a few projects primarily related to consumer markets, activating those, but also property markets to some extent, and a little bit on finance markets.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we'll explore each of your areas of expertise in detail in a minute. But before we do, again, I'd like to ask each of you in turn, given your experience in this area, maybe one or two of the key aspects of soil stewardship from your perspective. Nick, I'll go to you first.
In my view, it involves managing the soils in a way that optimises soil health production and the delivery of other ecosystem services, both in the short term and over the long term. And as you introduced at the start, Catherine, the name stewardship itself implies that farmers are custodians of the land, managing soils for the benefit of both current and future generations.
Thanks, Nick. Mark, aspects of soil stewardship?
Thanks, Catherine. For me, soil stewardship is really about mindset and way of thinking about the soil. So it's about thinking about how to support natural processes. So, adding and maintaining carbon in the soil supports microbial activity. That breaks down organic matter and makes nutrients available. So you've got healthy and vibrant plants, and that produces healthy food. It's also about thinking if they're dealing with any other deficiencies in the soil, soil's too acidic or missing specific minerals, dealing with that. But it's also about minimising activities that are more generally going to be harmful to microbial activity and release carbon. So minimising pesticide use, not ploughing up the soil unnecessarily, and reducing compaction. So it's about mindset that changes processes and underpins them, I suppose.
Thanks. Yep. Craig?
I believe quite strongly that in agriculture we've got a responsibility to be accountable to ourselves so that we can stay on in the game, to society, because as both Mark and Nick and Catherine have also mentioned, stewardship is a role of caring for the land for future generations, but also accountable to the landscape, not only just the soil, but to the water, to the biodiversity, to the plant community, to the interactions between all of those. And it's really, really critical, because the more we try to simplify our landscape, the more rapidly it's going to crash. So to me, soil stewardship is about building and regenerating our landscapes.
Thanks. So just pulling all that together, what the three of you, and I agree, are talking about is custodianship, is care, is practices that nurture, reducing practices that are damaging. It's about accountability. I reckon nobody's going to argue with any of this, that this is, it's a good thing with a capital G and a capital T. However, I think all of us will agree that there's currently few ways that that principle that probably everyone would agree with, that's what we should be doing with soils. There's really few ways to reward soil stewardship in Australia. That's what each of you is working on. How do we bring it to being able to be rewarded. So I'd like each of you to spend a little bit of time. We've got time here today to work through some of the research or the practice that you've been working on. I'll go in order again. It'll be Craig, Nick, and Mark. If you could expand a little on the key things that you're finding. Thanks.
I work closely with Land to Market, who have a process called Ecological Outcome Verification. It's a management agnostic process, so we don't really mind how you manage the landscape. But what we're searching for is a way of create. We baseline an ecological health index, and then we build on that on both short and long-term bases. And to me, that therefore gives you a method of verifying that A, your management's achieving what you want it to do, and B, credentialing you as being a good custodian of your landscape. As one of my Indigenous community said to me the other day, he said, "We don't own the land, it owns us." You might own it, you're a whitey. That's the way they view it. To me, we need to build on that, and Land to Market have a few very special partners, one of which is Harris Farm Markets, who are slowly encouraging their suppliers to move more towards a regenerative label and some accreditation. It's not accreditation, some verification of the outcomes of their management. And this is where we come in with EOV. Another one in the States who has ticked my boxes because they paid me 20 cents over the market for cows is Timberlands, the American footwear and leatherware producer, who will pay a premium for product that is carries the Land to Market tick. So to me, that's a very, very useful function. As the rest of the market moves towards it, of course, it'll diminish and we'll have to look at other models.
Okay. You okay there for now? I might actually, in that case, go to Mark rather than Nick, because you were talking about markets, consumer markets. So Mark, can you tell us some of the work that you're doing in the consumer market area in this area?
Yes, and if I forget, please remind me to get back to where Craig ended off. We've working on a pretty large project actually on consumer markets. It's a team from CSU and UTAS, and there's two strands to the research. We've been doing work actually with the whole value chain from, farmer groups, food manufacturers, retailers and others to understand, what they think about rewarding farmers for soil stewardship, what might be the obstacles, and what might be the opportunities, and what might be some current practice that they're doing as well at the moment. Then we've been actually working with real life consumers. We did a lot of initial work just to understand how people thought about soil, and we learned that apart from those that are sort of have a link to farming or are very much into vegetable gardens, etc., they really don't know much, which is a problem. But they are motivated, they would be motivated in different ways. Some of them, some are very cost conscious, but there are certainly a group of consumers that are motivated by health and really want healthy food. But unfortunately, there is a real confusion about the difference between organic food and food that's grown with good soil stewardship practices. And they're not necessarily the same thing. You can, be organic, but very much still an industrial farmer. And that's increasing recognition of that in the organic industry as being an issue. Another reason is in concern for environment, particularly climate and storing carbon. And a third motivation for being prepared to pay is actually concern for farmers, their viability, and concern for farm communities. So all of those reasons are motivations. The value chain, though, is not yet, for the most part, convinced about this willingness to pay yet, though. So what we've done is we've developed a series of communications materials, a series of TVCs, some different websites. We developed a brand called Nurtured Lands. We developed a brand logo. We actually developed some certification logos, and we developed some advertorials. And what we're proposing to do shortly, the pre-test is literally about to go into the field, probably in the next couple of weeks, week or two. And then later this year, we are actually quantitatively testing across some different product categories. So we've actually done all the focus groups and so on for this, and to see whether people are willing to pay, what sort of market share they'll get for these different products vis-a-vis other products that are in these market categories. And yeah, just the effectiveness of the different combinations of communication materials. What I can say, though, is this, while we don't yet have the quant data, when we go and focus group this material and show it to people, it is quite transformative. People don't know, and they're fascinated to learn, and there is a real potential. Not everyone can pay. Look, there's definitely people that are very cost conscious, but there were many people who in these focus groups really were very interested, and we are certainly getting requests for our communications materials. So what else are we learning? Like Craig, I'll get to your point. You're right. You're completely right that there is a real need for certification and or verification. Consumers, there is real, and it needs to be trustworthy. There is a lot of doubt about the, veracity of certification schemes that are publicly available. There's a concern. There's a fair bit of greenwashing around. But then Craig mentioned Harris Farm, and there's definitely some green shoots happening. There are others, Hill Street Grocers in Tasmania, stocking some regen products. There's another group called Wide Open Agriculture. Essentially, I think it's a group of farmers, or it's certainly privately owned, and they have a brand called Dirty Clean Food, which is essentially lovely, that isn't it? It's essentially a regen product. And the value chain will say if it's a higher quality product, better, features, etc., more protein or whatever, yes, I'll pay more. But really the use of price incentives in Australia is quite limited, and probably, it is less than overseas. What we're seeing...
can you wind it up in a tick, Mark? Because I'd like to bring the financial in, and then we can talk certification a bit more, I think. Okay,
I will, Catherine. What we're seeing is food manufacturers offering market access and supply contracts for use of soil stewardship practices, and they might have an agreed price and essentially de-risk somewhat. What we're most often seeing, though, at the moment is educational support for change, with a view to it being a win-win. So farmers get the productivity, and the food manufacturers get more reliable supply and possibly lower cost over time. I just want to highlight, and I'll end here so we can get back to this perhaps, is that win-win is potentially risky, particularly if costs are shifted back up the supply chain over time. And there's some issues with the economics as well. I'll leave it there, Catherine, but we can get back to it as needed.
Yep, and I think we do need to get back, because the accountability and the certification and how do people prove things is really important. But it's not only the consumer markets, and I think Nick, I'd like you to bring the financials. Often many of us don't understand the banks and the financial areas, so if you could give us a few minutes and bring them into this equation.
Yes, Catherine. So as Mark identified in regards to consumer markets, there's reasons to be optimistic in regards to finance markets, particularly investment and banking. So through our own contact with bankers, valuers and others in the Australian financial market, and also our review of trends that are happening internationally, specifically in the States and throughout Europe, we can see there's growing investor and bank appreciation of soil-related risks and the significance of soils in sustaining food production and their role in delivering ecosystem services, with a lot of the focus in recent times being around carbon sequestration. When we talk to banks, it's clear that many bankers recognise how good soil stewards are profitable farmers, although they recognise there's a big opportunity here to make better use of soil-related information to enhance their decision-making. So one example of that has been Rabobank's piloting of soil health index, whereby a better index result could result in a better deal on your loan, a discount on your loan. And that was all developed in recognition of the importance of banks having access to numbers and measurable data to support their decision-making. So we're seeing bankers looking at soil stewardship and how they might have opportunities to create new products. So one example of new products that are starting to develop in the sustainability space is sustainability linked loans, and the CBA just had the first sustainability linked loan linked to ag in Australia with Stockyard Group. So the terms of the loan were linked to the firm meeting certain sustainability targets. Banks recognise how they need to be seen to be using their capital to enhance soil quality, and doing so can help to maintain their social licence to bank. So the bankers certainly see being involved in supporting soil stewardship as an opportunity both to enhance their social licence to lend, and also there's new opportunities in terms of new products that might open up. However, consistent with the consumer markets, it's all being held back at this stage by a lack of information. So there's a lack of clear understanding of the financial ramifications from soil-related risks. There's a lack of clear and easy to understand measures of soil health. There's still room to enhance the overall understanding of the broader ecosystem services that soils deliver, and there's a lack of cost-effective means of monitoring and measuring these services.
Thanks. So we see there's opportunity. We see that there's some things holding back, and I also see lots of comments in the chat. I'll go back to Craig, because you had an example. You're doing it. You're living what we're talking about at the moment with your ecological outcome verification. Why do you think that has worked? And there's also a question for you around why you think that could potentially drop off over time, which I think you mentioned.
Yeah, I did. And there are two aspects of the same coin. The why it's working: when I bought the place, I was told I'd be lucky to carry 100 cows and calves. We're now calving 550. And so, productivity has gone up by a factor of 5. And that's very much a function of seasons and diversity of plants, and also much healthier plants because they've got deeper root systems. So therefore they are less stressed by moisture. They recover more rapidly after dry spells, and they take a lot longer to go into what's commonly known as a drought. So that's the productivity side of it. On the market premium, I probably misdescribed it. It's okay if I'm getting a premium for my product now because I've got EOV, because I've got, I'm a good bloke and I'm doing all the right things by everybody. As more and more people get on the bus, the premium, excuse my hands, I've been working, the premium that I'm paid will diminish back towards commodity price, commodity price. So, if I'm getting 20 cents a kilo over the grid, as more people are doing the same sort of thing, either the grid will move up to them or I'll come back. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm a big loser, because my cost of production is so much lower than the cost of production of a conventional agricultural model that it's almost like a super profit at the moment. So we've got to be conscious that super profit will get eroded. It's a basic fact of economics. I've also got a finance background. These things tick my butt. So they're the 2 points. So long as we can keep creating a healthy soil, so long as we can keep building our productivity and our profitability and our biodiversity and our responsibilities to society, happy days. Does that answer your question, Kat?
Well, yes and no, because I guess I'm reading a lot of the comments in the chat at the moment, and I guess it's around that process of verification or process of certification. That yes, you're doing certain things and you're getting a premium for it. I think Mark and Nick are highlighting that process isn't well established at the moment. And Mark, I'm going to throw back to you on that, because that's where your new work is heading, and both Nick and you are involved in certification process.
Yeah, and I let me add 2 comments that very much so, and I really respect the work that Land to Market is doing. Let me say that, but I do think that there is a real challenge, and Nick mentioned it earlier, to come up with cost-effective ways of verification, so that there can be real trustworthiness in the eventual certifications. Many certifications do not have good verification, and it's a real issue. I think the second thing is and I don't dispute Craig's experience in his farm, at his scale, in his location, and with his mix of product. But I think the economics is still a bit is underdone, and the Soil CRC fortunately is funding some work in this area, and there are a number of other initiatives as well, trying to better understand the economics. And while I think, without question, we all absolutely agree that soil stewardship practices both maintain and increase productivity, no question there. I guess the real question is on the economics. Is it more costly? And while your cost structure might go down, if you include labour, maybe it doesn't. If you include more capital infrastructure, there's issues of transitioning, how you actually get there, how you survive in the meantime. And I do think that this is part of the win-win change, and particularly with carbon, it's going to become a much bigger issue. Farmers are going to be expected to, this is what's happening in the UK, farm with less energy, change the way you do your energy. That implies cost, and when the cost structure changes, I think this is what the risky thing is it's easy for the retailers to say, we're really reducing down our, we're doing really well in terms of our value chain, everything's sustainable, we're working with our value chain. But the international experience is the cost can be shifted backwards. And I think there really needs to be a mature discussion, and we've actually got a PhD about to start in this area on policy and legislative changes to make sure that the outcomes are equitable, so that the cost is appropriately shared. And sometimes there does need to be an increase in payment if the way of farming is completely having to change because there's been a structural change in the sector. And that's going to happen with climate change over the next 10 years and the requirements to change the way we use energy.
Okay, so thanks, Mark. That's brought in policy, and I think it's widening it. So we're saying it's not just an individual response. There is a societal response. If we want healthy soils to do all these things for us, we need to understand that there are many costs. Nick, I know in your work with the financial markets, part of the the issue with the banks is language, I guess, or the things which soil people measure as far as their soil goes aren't necessarily the things which banks might need to know. Could you tease that out a little bit, just as we're heading toward the end of this session?
Yeah, banks want just simple, easy to understand measures of soil health which help them to predict the financial viability of a potential borrower. And it can be difficult to identify research evidence that clearly summarises this is the cost of adopting soil stewardship practices. This is best practice soil stewardship in this context, given the soil health and the location and everything else that affects productivity. A lot of the soil research focuses on the impact of the adoption of practices on productivity without necessarily doing a full cost benefit analysis, and that's the kind of information that financial markets respond to. They want to understand the financial ramifications of soil related risks. We've seen movement in financial markets in regards to climate change risk because there's a growing awareness of the financial opportunities and risks associated with those climate associated risks. If we want soil stewardship to be rewarded and recognised similarly, we need equivalent financial data.
Okay, thanks for that. And I think what I'm hearing from the three of you is that there's a culture change around this as well that supports some of these processes. I will invite people to start putting their questions into the Q&A box because in a couple of minutes I'll throw open, and if you can make actual specific questions, that will make it easy for me to flick them to the right panellist. Before we get to there, I'd like each of the panellists to spend 30 seconds, a minute on, no, you've got a minute, on what you think needs to change to be able to allow our society, our systems, however you look at it, to be able to better reward soil stewardship. Who would like to go first? I'll be democratic here. Mark. I can see Mark moving. Yep.
I don't mind. 1 minute. Okay, let's go. I think we need to educate consumers, especially differences with organics, that it's something else. I think we need quite a few new products in the market. We need new brands, and we have to articulate the features that are related to soil health, whether it's about carbon or it's about water holding capacity or it's about nutrient density or etc. We need the specifics. The economics needs to be clarified. We definitely need simple certification verification, and there's a real challenge for farmers, landholders, because there are so many out there already, and part of our future project is trying to deal with that situation, which is really quite messy, and we're going to be working with farmer groups and the whole value chain. Transition funding, mentioned that already. Government policy and institutions, definitely. And I think the really big one that's just not getting enough work at the moment is property markets. So they really need to be activated so that those who really look after their property markets do get a reward. Their properties, they get a reward. I think there is also a bit of an issue with some of the other related markets like carbon markets. Sorry, Catherine, this is more than a minute. Carbon markets and others, that the problem is you're actually rewarding non-performance. If you're a bad performer, you do really well. Then you can improve and get a lot of money. So that's something we is a real issue too. But it will help those areas get better. But
yep. Okay, thanks, Craig.
There's a couple of things I noticed. There's a comment on the impact on leased land. I do have some leased country that my late landlord, as by describing him as late, his widow sent me an email when the property was transferred to her because of the way that we've been managing the property and the improvements that aren't visually without any external verification. Bang, happy days, nothing will change. List rates haven't gone up. She's not going to sell it on me or anything like that. So that answers that one. I'd like to see from the farming community's point of view, a mindset change, because we're fighting, and Mark's alluded to this a couple of times, we've got all the sides going onto our soils, going onto our food product, and it's not really doing society any great favours. So I think we need to have society sort of sitting there and saying, well, hang on, what is really in this stuff? And, we're seeing all this stuff about plant-based foods. And I'm wondering how much of that plant-based foods is produced from a healthy soil to provide them with something that they think is healthy. So these are, it's the consumer, it's the supplier, it's in terms of the value chain, the guys that are under the biggest threat in the value chain are the agronomists and the chemical suppliers, because most of us don't use any form of side or fert or anything like that because we don't need to.
Okay. Thanks. Nick, what do you think needs to change?
Consistent with Mark, in simple terms, financial markets can't value soil health if they can't measure it. And as I've said before, we need clear and easy to understand metrics concerning soil health and the financial ramifications from the adoption of the soil stewardship practices. And broadly, we need to be exploring other potential buyers of soil ecosystem services. So we see the government's interested in carbon sequestration and investing it. Who else might be interested in investing? What other soil ecosystem services have potential marketable opportunities beyond carbon? Who are these buyers? What are their motivations and willingness to buy, and their expectations around monitoring and auditing, and how can we do this in an efficient way? And ultimately, we're trying to ensure that farmers have the necessary capital from all the potential pools of capital that are available to make the investments they need to make. Okay,
thank you very much for that, but that's only the start. We've got a lot of comments happening in the questions and in the chat. And I think, if people keep answering the questions, they disappear and I don't get to see them anymore. And this is probably a question to Michael Crawford. Are the panellists willing to share their contact details? I think you can all be contacted through the CRC and Soils for Life, and the panellists themselves are nodding. So that's good. There was a question which I think someone has answered, but I would like it answered really briefly by at least one of the panellists. Are the rewards always monetary that we're talking about? My short answer is no.
Yeah, no. Look, I mean, I actually had a go at answering this in the chat. I don't know if it can be seen, but or in the Q&A, there's quite a lot of evidence that farming in a way that supports soil stewardship. It's good for the heart, good for the soul, good for well-being. And I mean, I think even just the reduced sort of pesticide use. I'm sure that has health benefits, but just seeing nature being supported and having a productive farm, it's that's good psychologically. So there's definitely benefit there, and I think you can get a real smile on your face when you see your farm is very green at times when others are not, and that and to have a farm that's less susceptible to risk. And can be, still productive in drier years that's very good for mental health. So there is really a range of benefits, but at the same time, we don't just live on love. We've got to be able to pay the bills, and farming enterprises are expensive. Often inputs are quite expensive. The value chain often strikes quite a challenging deal, and so you do need appropriate payment And, you know, I've certainly read papers that suggest for some types of farming, you know, you need different equipment. You're doing things in different ways. Sometimes it needs more people. So that's why there is a need for money, and particularly if we're, you know, some access to some inputs is going to change over time. So I don't think money is all of it, but it's definitely needed.
Yep, I think that's great. Thanks, Mark. And I think that is the point. We are talking a fair bit about financial and monetary rewards here, but it's also about market share. It's about risk reduction. There's all sorts of things which are measures. And I guess the mechanisms that we work with in our capitalist society are often financial ones, which is why we've been focusing on that today. A question for Craig from Lucas Van Sweten. Can you please share with us your thinking all those years ago when you decided to go regenerative? Was stewardship in that initial thinking? Craig.
Sure. Okay. In the 1991 drought, I had the dubious pleasure, or the fun, or the drover's life has pleasures that the townsfolk never know, to take my father's cattle on the road because of the drought. And I found my biggest problem was they were getting fatter than I wanted them to for pregnancy status and all that sort of thing. So I'd worked out how to fatten cattle by just moving them around, and then discovered grazing for profit / holistic management, etc. So that took me down that path, and a focus within that whole holistic management thing. And the key word's management is the more you can build your landscape's health, the better your productivity is going to be, the better your livestock health is going to be, the better your own mental health is going to be, which Mark was alluding to. And it is, it seriously is. I had several thousand cattle on my boundary being fed. We had none because we destocked. I had a broken arm. My partner and I were in far better state than the workers and the management on any of the places around here. They were shooting cattle as though that were too weak to get up because they were feeding them. Doesn't do you much good. Mm. Did I look at stewardship at the time? I think really the first exposure I had to it was working as part of a case study with University of New England in 2007, when we were looking at the various ecosystem services and could we develop, was there a possibility of developing markets for them? So this is not exactly a new space, but to me, someone might reward me, but I go out there and I look at the chocolate lilies that are just starting to flower at the moment. And I think, hey, that feels good, as well as a lot of calves on the ground that have to be marked. There's a comment there about social benefit and ecosystem benefits that must be attached to ACCUs. Just briefly, the spot ACCU market is, for want of a better description, a bare ACCU. It is up carbon credit. For those that have verification that they're either...
Sorry, Craig, could you explain ACCU before you go much further?
Sorry, Australian carbon credit units, which are the equivalent of 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent, which has been registered with the Clean Energy Regulator.
Okay.
Now, there is a spot ACCU market which trades infrequently, but it's gone up about 50% in the last 3 months, and it's a raw ACCU. It's just a basic commodity ACCU, for want of a better description. There are premiums paid, which we don't see so much in the market, for ACCUs that have come from projects from an Indigenous background, from projects from a landscape background, for projects that have more social responsibility. And the market's really, really hard to track on them because a lot of them are over-the-counter deals. They're not necessarily an exchange deal. The only one you really see is the spot ACCU market, which is, as I say, it's commodity ACCU. It's the base.
Yep. Okay, thanks for that. I'll go to the, I'll reward the people who put their questions in the Q&A box. From Michael Gooden, and it's to whoever wants to take it. What are the downsides to focusing on soil health? How can we best put a value on increasing soil health? And it does tie up with some of the measurements, and Richard's put an answer there. Who would like to? There's two parts to that. How can we best put a value on increasing soil health?
Happy to have a go, Catherine. So I'm answering as an economist here, but you can put it, you can figure out the value in terms of effects on sale properties. There's a property market technique, it's technically called hedonic pricing, but essentially you look at how variations in soil quality and health influence property prices. There's been a lot of these studies done globally, some done in Australia. From the perspective of consumers, that quantitative approach we did before, I mentioned before that we're about to do, actually can be used to show consumer willingness to pay, as well as effects on market share for soil stewardship practices. In terms of one of the downsides, I guess this is a question about whether we just focus on soil health, or are we better making the construct a little bit broader? So Craig mentioned ecosystem services. On farm there's a lot, so it might be biodiversity as well, and so we just don't look at one. So in England, the UK rather, they've got a thing called, I think it's Red Tractor. And it looks at both animal welfare issues, biodiversity, and soil health. Are we better to, in terms of what comes to market, do them all, or just focus on, the regen, given the health benefits?
Yep. Nick?
I think it's important to recognise that how we best value soil health depends on who we're valuing it for. So obviously, if we're valuing it for a farmer that likely be interested in productivity, a consumer would recognise value in terms of the health benefits. Banks interested in the value of soil health in de-risking the property. Different people will want different value measures.
Good point.
It is a good point. And it does, so Richard, oh sorry, Craig.
I was just going to say, I don't necessarily see too many downsides in focusing on soil health, because if you're managing, again, that M word, if you're managing your soil health and you're managing your production levels, you'll probably find as your soil health improves, your production levels and therefore your profitability will improve. In terms of looking at it from the perspective of change of land valuation, you're only going to sell it once, and my intention is not to sell it for a hell of a long time yet. So I hope the rest of the world's caught up with me. My vision is for them to do that.
Okay, so there is some questions and comments from Richard Doyle around health and soil metrics, and what are we measuring, which I think are important questions. Not sure which one to go for here, but I think that idea of we haven't actually pinned down what soil health is, what Nick's point about how you value it for different people. It will be multifaceted, multi-sided, and it will always be complex. We will wrap up in a few minutes, but I guess if I wanted to say anything around this, I think it's really exciting that we're having the conversations around this, because that's one of the things that really has been missing in the past, I think, is bringing soil into these larger conversations about the future of the world. Nothing small. there isn't a soil sustainable development goal. But if you look at all the sustainable development goals, soil underpins some of that. So I think it's great that soil stewardship, soil health, regenerative farming, all these, we're not going to pin them down today, the four of us, but the conversations that we're having around here are vitally important for our societies, for a whole range of the reasons and the values which have been said. There's a quick question from Anne McNeil. We've probably got about 2 minutes to go, I think, around whether it's harder for farming systems without animals. I'm not sure who wants to take that. Probably Craig would be a good one.
The example I use, I had the pleasure of hosting Gabe Brown from North Dakota here 4 or 5 years ago. Gabe's probably one of the best figurehead leaders of the regenerative agriculture movement. And we were just wandering around the paddock and he was chatting and he said, look, I've got some real issues with the country I own because I live within city limits. And so therefore it's got to be economically viable. But the place is really split into three. Some of my cash cropping country I cannot run livestock on. Some of my grazing country I cannot crop because it's so stony and rocky and da-da-da. He said the most profitable land I have is the landscape that has livestock integrated into the cropping side of it. And that's where I'm getting not only the most cash profit, I'm also getting the most carbon sequestration, I'm also getting the greater biodiversity enhancement. Animals have been on this landscape for longer than humans. It's just how we manage them. So
we have, thank you for that. We have reached the end of our time. I've got some questions there. I think, I'm hoping Michael will come back to wrap this up for us. But these questions, it's been recorded. We've got the questions and the comments that will be part of the package that comes from this. I think it's been wonderful to talk complexity and complex ideas, difficult ideas with the three of you, and I really appreciate your time. Over to you, Michael, to finish up.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Thank you for facilitating that. Thank you to our speakers, Mark, Craig and Nick. And my reflections on that, one, it was good to actually be taking a back seat and watching rather than participating myself. But in a parallel universe, we had the chat function going. There's lots of good conversations going in the chat. So thank you, everybody, for your contributions there. There's an apology from me as CEO. If you came to this panel discussion expecting a straightforward answer on this question about rewarding soil stewardship, perhaps we haven't got it. What we've exposed is that there's a whole range of issues to consider, pros and cons now and into the future. Part of that is what we do in the Soil CRC is bringing research to shine a light both upon the questions and the answers, and the more questions and more answers. An interesting reflection, we've had a conversation here about rewarding soil stewardship. We don't have a soil scientist on the panel. So I'd say it's a positive thing as a pseudo soil scientist myself to not have a soil scientist here. I know there'll be others out there thinking, but it recognises also that the soil CRC brings together a whole range of discipline expertise. It's not just about soil science, bringing together the sociologists, the economists, the marketing, the accounting, and of course the end users, the farmer practice. In these conversations. So I won't keep going on. I'll thank everybody for their participation, for their attendance, their engagement. You'll be able to see a recording of this panel discussion on our webpage and on our YouTube page in the next day or so. We did post the email addresses in the chat as we're going along. So hopefully you got a chance to see them there. If not, just drop me an email, michaelcrawford.soilcrc.com.au, and I'll pass them on to you. And look forward to seeing many of you at future webinars and panel discussions related to the Soil CRC. Thanks again, Catherine, Mark, Craig, Nick. Thanks everyone for attending. Goodbye.